The desert didn't kill her. Not right away. The sky was the color of rust, burning behind the cliffs as if the world had caught fire. The wind howled through the canyon like a thing alive, and Evelyn Merritt, drenched in sweat and blood, crawled from the smoking ruins of what had once been a wagon. Her hands trembled as she gripped a jagged rock to haul herself upright. Ash clung to her dress. Her belly, round and firm beneath the fabric, twitched as the child inside turned restlessly, sensing danger. Behind her, a wheel spun slowly in the dirt, creaking on a splintered axle. The wagon was overturned, one of the mules gone, the other gutted open where it lay. She didn't look at it. She couldn't. There was already too much red. Her breath came in short gasps. The taste of copper coated her tongue. The attack had been fast. Gunshots from the ridge, the driver slumping before he could curse, the world turning sideways in a blast of heat and splinters. She'd rolled, shielded her stomach, hidden in a crevice while the outlaws picked through what was left. They hadn't found her then. But they would. Eve stood on shaking legs and turned toward the horizon, westward, where the rock formations curled like the fingers of a buried god. The nearest settlement was 2 days away, and she had no horse. The wind changed direction. She froze. Hoofbeats. It wasn't the measured pace of a lone rider. It was the erratic, clattering rhythm of 3, no for, horses descending from the bluff. She turned to run but made it 5 steps before a voice called out, lazy and twanged like old wire. Well. The little ghost done wandered out. She stopped. Her fists clenched. The voice belonged to the one called Boone, though the others just called him Flicker on account of the way his eye twitched when he lied, which was always. He was barely 20, pale as chalk, with a nervous smile and a rifle he didn't know how to aim. Beside him was Grit Dugan, who rode a black gelding with a limp and smiled like a man who'd never had a good thought in his life. He wore a bear claw necklace and carried 2 sawed-off shotguns slung across his back like wings. And in front of them all rode Ransom Creed. Ransom didn't smile. He didn't curse or spit. He just looked at her with a face like a cracked tombstone and said, "Thought I smelled settler blood." He slid from his horse with all the patience of a man sharpening a knife. Eve's hands fell to her sides. Her mouth was dry. Creed walked up, tilted his head. "Ain't dead. Lucky girl." She didn't respond. "You were with that freight runner?" Tall man, beard like a wet rug. She nodded once. "Guess he's fertilizer now." Ransom pulled a cigar from his vest. "You carry yin?" Her hand went instinctively to her stomach. Grit barked out a laugh. "She's knocked up. Hell, maybe we ought to leave her. Buzzards'll do the job for us." Creed struck a match on the heel of his boot and lit the cigar. "We don't leave coin on the ground, Grit. The lady might be worth something. Or someone. Might even have a name we can trade." He finally spoke. "You'll get nothing but trouble if you take me." Boone laughed too loudly, then coughed. Creed just stared, expressionless. "I like trouble," he said. They tied her wrists, not too tight, not gentle either, and lifted her onto Grit's horse. The ride was long, the sun cruel, and the dust got into her throat and eyes. No one spoke much. Once Boone offered her water, but Grit swatted his hand and said, "Ain't no kindness left for ghosts." They made camp by a red rock arch deep in Devil's Backbone Canyon. The place was cursed according to some. Eve remembered a story about Apaches ambushing Confederate scouts there and leaving their bones to bleach under the stars. Grit thought it was funny. "Guess that means it's ours now." They gave her a blanket and tied her to a post. Not cruelly. Just enough to remind her that she was theirs. Night came. Creed sat on a rock, carving a piece of wood. Boone poked at a fire with the butt of his rifle. Grit sang tunelessly to himself, a song with no words, just guttural nonsense that sounded more animal than human. Eve watched them in silence, memorizing their patterns. Creed was the one to fear. He didn't posture. He didn't smile. His silence had weight. When he spoke, the other 2 listened. Even Boone, who never shut up, quieted around him. "What's your name?" Creed asked eventually. "Eve." He chewed the cigar. "You from Galena?" She shook her head. "Farther." He stared at the fire. "You got family looking for you?" "Probably not." "Good." She wanted to lie. Say her father was a judge, her brother a sheriff. But Creed didn't seem like the kind of man you fooled twice. And besides, she had one hope. Just one. And she didn't dare speak it aloud. She looked toward the stars. Somewhere beyond those hills, he'd feel it. He had to. Red Hawk. She hadn't spoken his name in months. She'd buried him with the rest of her past when she left the trading post. She had convinced herself it was the right thing. A white woman with a child by a Navajo? There were no kind endings to that story. The settlers wouldn't accept it. The tribe had its own code. She'd run instead, lie to everyone, including herself. But the child knew. She could feel it in the way it kicked when she dreamt of Red Hawk's hands. The man had never used a gun, never needed one. His knives danced like spirits through wind. Once she saw him pin 3 men in the dark without making a sound. If he knew she was taken. "Hey," Boone said, waving something shiny. It was her locket. She lurched forward, but the rope at her wrists held. "Easy now," Boone smirked. "Ain't stealin'. Just lookin'. Thought it was empty, till I popped it open." He held it up. A tiny sketch inside, drawn in coal and waterbrush. A man's face, angular, strong-jawed, eyes like obsidian. Not Elijah, her husband. This was a different man entirely. "Don't look like no white man to me," Grit said, narrowing his eyes. Creed took the locket, examined it. His brow furrowed. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. Eve said nothing. Creed stood, crossed the distance in 2 strides, and crouched beside her. He held the locket inches from her face. "This your baby's father?" Still she said nothing. Creed leaned in. "You tellin' me you were ridin' with a Navajo?" She met his eyes. "I loved him." Creed stared for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stood and handed the locket back to Boone. "No ransom then. No family. No town that'll take her." Grit grinned. "So what do we do?" Creed didn't answer. He walked to his bedroll and lay down, the cigar's ember glowing like a slow fuse. Eve's heart thudded as she leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Somewhere out there, Red Hawk was moving. She knew it as sure as she knew the desert's breath. He'd feel the absence of her. He always had. The child shifted in her womb. Not from fear. From hunger. From power. She waited. Not because she trusted the night, but because she knew it always brought him. And when it did, there'd be reckoning. Even ghosts, she thought, don't stay quiet forever. The desert whispered secrets only those who'd lived through blood could understand. Far from the outlaw camp, beneath a stand of ghost cedars twisted by wind and time, Red Hawk crouched beside a cracked hoofprint. The sand was soft, the indent shallow but unmistakable. 4 riders. 1 horse dragging its step. 1 smaller imprint, barely a mark, sat awkwardly in the middle. Not a rider who belonged. He stood slowly, fingers tightening around the hilt of the blade at his hip. Bone-handled. His father's. His thumb traced the engraving on the pommel, a coil of wind curling into a bird's wing. His name, Tatsi, meant wind blade. He had not earned it with words. Only steel. And silence. Behind him, the sun hung low like a burning eye, and the wind shifted. He could taste it, ash, horses, sweat. Not far now. He closed his eyes. Evelyn. It had been nearly 7 months since she fled the border settlement. 7 months since she left with swollen eyes and a flat lie carved into her tongue. Asterisk, I need to go. I can't stay here. Asterisk, she hadn't said why. She hadn't needed to. He knew the reasons. The whispers. The hard looks from her own people. A white woman carrying a Navajo man's child? The land wasn't kind enough for that kind of story. But even after all that silence, he had never stopped feeling her in the land. And now, after the scout's report, 4 outlaws riding through Navajo land, one with a pale woman, heavy with child, Red Hawk knew what he had to do. She was his. And so was the storm that followed. He moved like the shadow of a hawk on canyon walls, his body silent against stone. Each step precise. He left no trail. His knives rested against his chest beneath a woven vest. One was for cutting, one for silence, one for death. Back in the outlaw camp, Eve sat upright against the wagon wheel they'd chained her to. Her fingers were raw from the coarse rope. The night had passed quietly, save for Boone's occasional snoring and Grit's drunken muttering. Ransom Creed, she noticed, never slept deeply. His eyes flickered open at the slightest noise as if he dreamed of war. She watched the men move. Patterns. That's what mattered. Grit patrolled the camp perimeter once every half hour, never looking back. Boone was easily distracted, especially when carving into wood with his dull pocket knife. Creed rarely left his post. He stayed close to her, always watching. And Calder, the medic-turned-preacher-turned-outlaw, was the question mark. He wasn't cruel like Grit or twitchy like Boone. He was quiet, always chewing dried herbs and muttering fragments of scripture, but not with conviction. Like a man trying to remember who he used to be. That morning she'd coughed until she nearly choked. Creed hadn't reacted. Calder had knelt beside her and handed her a flask. She took it with shaking hands and sipped. Not poisoned, he'd muttered. I like children. She'd given him a look. I mean, he corrected. I don't like hurting people. Not like them. I came along for medicine. I patch holes. That's all. You patch bullet holes? She'd whispered. He'd shrugged. Better than digging graves. Later, when the sun climbed high and the flies grew bold, Eve waited until Grit's patrol had passed and Boone was too deep in thought. With trembling fingers, she dug into the dirt beside her. Just beneath the wheel was a jagged fragment of tin, part of a shattered cooking pan. She pressed the tin into her palm and winced as it bit the skin. Blood dotted the metal. She didn't stop. She scratched words, clumsily but legibly. Alive. For men. One woman. Moving west. She folded the note small and slipped it beneath the loose band of cloth on her ankle. The next time they moved camp, she'd drop it. With luck, someone might find it. She didn't believe in luck, but it helped to pretend. That night, the wind carried voices down the canyon. Faint echoes. Not the outlaws, someone else. A coyote howled once, then went silent. The fire crackled low. Boone sat near it, flipping a coin through his fingers. He spoke softly to himself, the words slurring. She ain't white where it counts. Not if she's carryin' one of them. Eve's heart froze. Boone stood and wandered toward her, squinting. His coin vanished into a pocket. You sleepin'? She didn't answer. Figure Creed's keepin' you alive, 'cause he thinks someone might want you back. But he don't know, does he? Boone squatted, close enough for her to smell the tobacco on his breath. He don't know you laid with a red man. She stared at him. You know what they used to do to girls like you back in Missouri? He whispered. Creed's voice cut through the dark. Boone. Boone jumped. Just checkin' she ain't dead. Get away from her. Boone backed off, muttering but didn't argue. Creed didn't speak again. Later, as the fire burned low and the men settled, Calder wandered near and dropped the canteen at her feet. Watch your moment, he whispered. It'll come. She stared at him. Even out here, he said, miracles still happen. When the men finally slept, Eve lay awake, heart pounding. Her fingers brushed the tin plate. She mouthed Red Hawk's name once, barely audible. He was out there. She could feel it. Somewhere close. And Red Hawk was close. By dawn, he had tracked the outlaws to the lower ridge above the canyon floor. From there, he saw the faint traces of a camp. Hoof prints, ashes, a dropped cloth torn from a saddlebag. Eve's scent was there too, juniper and smoke. He followed without rest. Along the trail he found the note. A scrap of tin half buried beneath a crooked stone, its sharp edge catching morning light. He recognized the handwriting. Crude, desperate, but hers. Blood still dark in the corner. He pressed it to his forehead briefly. A promise? From a ridge, he spotted the camp again. He crouched and studied them. Creed, always still, sat near the fire. Boone was cleaning a rifle badly. Grit snored under a hide. Calder stirred something in a pot. And Eve, she sat tied to the wagon, her chin tilted down, hands limp in her lap. Red Hawk's jaw clenched. Too many guards to strike now. Too open. But night would come again. He would wait. Eve shifted as a fresh cramp twisted her belly. The child was restless again, kicking low and hard. Her breath hitched. She gritted her teeth and forced calm. If she panicked now, they'd tie her tighter, watch her closer. She needed to be patient. Watch for signs. And there it was. Calder, when he thought no one looked, gave her a glance. A flicker of sympathy. Not much. But enough. Later, Boone tripped over Grit's boot and spilled his beans across the dust. Grit swore and punched him. Boone tackled him back. For a moment, chaos erupted. Eve didn't move. But her eyes flicked to the hilltop. Nothing. Still, she felt him. The wind had shifted. He was near. And if she had to wait one more night, she would. Because the man with the knives, the one who loved without asking her to change, without needing her to pretend, was coming. And when he did, blood would follow. In the canyon stillness, the coyote howled again. Eve smiled barely. It was enough. The moon hung low and mean, a silver blade over Devil's backbone. The camp was quiet but not at peace. A fire burned low in the pit, casting long writhing shadows on the canyon walls. Eve sat, her wrists chafed and sore, the child inside her stirring again, this time with purpose, not panic. She gritted her teeth and swallowed against the nausea rising in her throat. Her body was preparing for something. It felt it in her bones. And not just birth. The men were restless. Grit and Boone had argued for hours, a fight that began over rations and ended with Boone threatening to take his cut early and leave. Creed had said nothing. He let them bark, let them spend their venom. Then, when Grit had tried to push past him, Creed had stood and simply looked at him. Grit backed down. No threats. No violence. Just that stare. Creed didn't need to speak to control a room. His stillness did the talking. The kind of stillness that said he'd killed men slowly just to make a point. Eve watched him now, sitting by the fire, his long fingers slowly wiping a hunting knife clean with an oilcloth. It wasn't blood he was wiping off, just dirt, perhaps, or superstition. But there was a ceremony to it, a devotion. And that scared her more than rage ever could. She shifted, testing the rope around her ankles. Tighter than yesterday. No slack. She stopped when she felt the baby twist again, a sharp push just beneath her ribs. Not yet, she told it silently. Just hold on. Creed glanced her way, eyes catching the moonlight. You're close, he said quietly. She didn't answer. Been around birth before. Woman gets that hollow look. Like she's listening to something inside her breaking open. Still she said nothing. Creed stood and walked over, crouched beside her, not threatening, just curious like a man inspecting a piece of machinery. You think he's coming, don't you? He asked. You're Indian. She met his eyes. Didn't flinch. I know he is. Creed looked at her for a long time, then chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. You got more steel in you than I thought, he said. Maybe he taught you that. Or maybe you had it before. He stood again. I'll give you a choice, he said. You tell me where he's likely to come from. I post my men smart. Nobody dies. You stay alive long enough to have the baby and maybe, we find someone who'll pay for you. I'd rather die, she said. He gave a faint nod. That can be arranged too. Then he turned and walked back to the fire. Red Hawk was already inside the canyon by then. He had watched their movements for 3 days. Measured their habits. Boone was careless. Grit was mean but predictable. Calder still didn't seem to know which side of his soul he stood on, and Creed was the lock on the door. But Red Hawk knew locks. And he knew how to pick them without a sound. He moved through the shadows like water through cracked stone. His feet barely touched the sand. He'd painted his skin with desert ash, masked his scent with juniper sap. A ghost walking among the living. He waited until the fire burned low, until Boone passed out against a barrel and Grit took the late watch, half drunk, half blind. Calder had turned in early. Creed was the only one awake, whittling something from bone. Red Hawk crouched just beyond the outer rocks and waited. Listen, the child would come soon. He felt it in the ground. Creed stood finally and stretched, eyes scanning the dark, but without suspicion. Just a predator's restlessness. He walked a slow circle around the camp perimeter, checked the horses, muttered to himself. Then he stepped behind a stone outcropping to relieve himself. That's when Red Hawk moved. He slid into the camp like a ripple in heat. No sound. Just presence. Eve's head snapped up. She couldn't see anything but her breath caught in her throat. He was near. She could feel it. Then, soft as a breath, fingers touched her ankle. She looked down. The ropes were being cut. A flicker of movement behind the wagon. A flash of dark eyes in the shadow. Her heart leapt, but she made no sound. Just let the tears fall silently as the rope slackened and her feet came free. A soft whisper at her ear. Are you hurt? No, she mouthed. The baby? He placed a hand on her belly briefly. She felt the warmth of it even through the fabric. Not yet, he whispered. But soon. He pulled a blade from his chest strap and pressed it into her palm. If I don't make it back to you, he said, you fight. She nodded once. Then he was gone again. Creed returned seconds later, none the wiser. At dawn, the desert opened its eyes. Creed was the first to sense it. A change in the wind. A silence that wasn't natural. He stood abruptly and barked an order. Up. Now. Boone woke with a start. Grit cursed and grabbed his guns. Calder stumbled out of his bedroll, confused. Something's wrong, Creed said. We're moving. Now. He turned to Eve and stopped. The ropes were cut. She was gone. He didn't curse. He didn't shout. He simply pointed. Find her. But Eve hadn't run far. She was crouched behind the wagon, blade in hand, belly heavy and breath sharp. When Boone rounded the wheel, she slashed without hesitation. The knife cut his cheek wide open. He screamed and staggered back, rifle swinging wildly. Eve lunged for his belt, grabbed his pistol and rolled. Red Hawk struck then. A blur from the shadows. He hit Boone like a hammer, elbow to the throat, knee to the gut. The young outlaw dropped without a sound. Eve gasped, one hand on her stomach. Creed turned just in time to see Red Hawk lift her to her feet. That's him. Grit roared, firing blindly. Dust exploded behind them as Red Hawk ducked and rolled with Eve in his arms, disappearing between the rocks. Creed barked commands, his voice hard. Don't chase. Herd them. Corner them. He won't leave her. They moved fast, cutting off the canyon mouth. Red Hawk knew the terrain. But he also knew time was running out. Eve stumbled, nearly fell. He caught her, cradled her briefly. Contractions, she said, teeth clenched. They're coming faster. He scanned the cliffs. There's a ledge. Narrow. We make it there, they won't follow. She nodded. No fear in her face, just grit. Like always, they climbed. Below, Creed and his men found blood, wounds, and tracks. They followed slowly, cautious now. Red Hawk had drawn first blood. That meant he was close. And Creed knew better than to rush a blade fighter into a trap of his own making. On the ledge, Eve collapsed. Her breath came in gasps. Water broke. Pain split her in half. I can't, she whispered. You can, Red Hawk said, kneeling beside her. You are stronger than the desert. She gripped his arm. You'll have to fight again. They'll come. He nodded. Then I will end it. He kissed her forehead just once. Then he stood. Below, Creed stared up at the ledge, teeth bared in a grin. Well now, he muttered. Looks like we get ourselves a little finale. He signaled. Grit cocked his guns. The storm was about to break. The first scream tore through the canyon like the call of a wounded hawk, high and shrill, echoing off the stone and rattling the bones of the men below. Red Hawk didn't flinch. He crouched at the edge of the ledge, blade drawn, eyes narrowed. The entrance to the narrow shelf was tight. Only one man could come at a time. He had chosen well. The jagged terrain behind him protected Eve, whose cries rose again, sharp, ragged, primal. Blood streaked the sandstone where she lay, one hand gripping a cluster of twisted roots, the other pressed to her swollen belly. He had built a shallow barricade of stone and branches as cover, but it wouldn't hold under sustained fire. He knew that. What he counted on was Creed's arrogance. The first outlaw to climb was Boone, his face still wrapped in a torn cloth, blood dried on the cheek Eve had cut. He came fast, unthinking, driven by fury, not strategy. Red Hawk waited until he was close enough to smell his sweat. Then he struck. A single move, sidestep, pivot, blade under the ribs and up into the lungs. Boone choked on his own breath and tumbled backward, hitting the rocks below with a sickening crunch. Boone's down. Calder shouted. Creed didn't move. His eyes were locked on the cliff, studying the shadow where Red Hawk had vanished. Don't rush him, Creed said. Let him bleed time. Woman's in labor. He'll weaken. Calder flinched as Eve screamed again. It wasn't just pain now, it was fear. She's crowning, Calder muttered. Then we wait, Creed said, lighting a match against his boot. She dies before he does. It'll break him. Red Hawk could feel her slipping into the brink of agony. Her cries were shorter now, more guttural. The child fought to be born and she fought to live. He knelt beside her, wiped her face with a cloth he'd dipped in his own water skin. She looked up at him with eyes wide, wild, but locked onto his. You stay, she rasped. Don't go. I won't, he said and meant it. You told me once, she whispered, trembling, our blood could grow something good in this world. Something better than us. He nodded. She gripped his arm. Then let's do that. He helped her push. Below, Creed's patience thinned. Grit paced like a chained dog, mumbling curses. She's gonna die up there before we even get a shot, he muttered. Creed ground out his cigarette in the dirt. That's fine. He breaks, we kill him slow. Calder spoke, his voice hesitant. What if she doesn't die? Creed's head turned sharply. Then we gut her in front of him. Calder's hand drifted toward his revolver, then stopped. The sky turned red with evening. Above, blood soaked Eve's legs. She screamed again, body convulsing. Red Hawk held her up as she pushed. And then, suddenly, there was life. A sound more powerful than any gunshot. A newborn's cry. No. Defiant. Red Hawk blinked hard. The knife in his hand trembled. A daughter. He wrapped her in Eve's torn shawl, pressing her gently against her mother's chest. Eve sobbed, trembling, smiling through tears and exhaustion. Her lips found his fingers, kissed them. I can't move, she whispered. You don't have to. He stood again, shoulders squared. Below, Creed heard it, the baby's wail, and scowled. She survived. So did the child, Calder said. Creed turned toward him. Still got a job to do. Calder's hand hovered again. But Creed noticed. You going soft? Creed asked. Calder didn't answer. Grit, impatient, grabbed his rifle and began climbing. Fine, Creed muttered. Flush him out. Grit made it halfway before Red Hawk met him. This time he didn't wait. He leapt from the rocks above, landed hard on Grit's back and drove a blade into his shoulder. The outlaw screamed, twisted, tried to throw him off, but Red Hawk held tight. They crashed down the ledge, both bodies thudding into stone. Red Hawk rolled to his feet first. Grit reached for his revolver, but Red Hawk's boot crushed his hand. Then the second blade flashed and it was over. Creed clapped once, slow, impressed. "You don't disappoint," he called up. Red Hawk stood at the edge of the ledge again, blood running down his arm. "You come now," Red Hawk said, "or you never leave." Calder looked at Creed. "Don't?" Creed stared at him. "You heard me," Calder said, voice trembling but clear. "She gave birth. Let them go. We ride out. We disappear." Creed drew his gun and shot Calder in the gut. The medic fell without a sound. Creed didn't look down, just holstered the weapon and climbed. Red Hawk waited, watching the narrow path. He knew Creed wasn't Boone or Grit. This was a killer who moved with purpose. No rage. No waste. They met at the mouth of the ledge. Creed came with a knife in hand, long, serrated, not for slicing, *4 tearing star. Red Hawk said nothing. Just stepped forward. They circled. Two predators. No words. Just breath and movement. Creed struck first, fast, low, but Red Hawk deflected, twisted. Blades scraped, sparks danced. Red Hawk ducked, slashed Creed's thigh. Creed grunted, came back with a slash that caught Red Hawk's side. Blood sprayed the rock. They didn't slow. Another exchange. Red Hawk stabbed low, Creed blocked and drove his elbow into Red Hawk's temple. Red Hawk staggered, vision flickering. Creed tackled him, both tumbling to the stone. They rolled. Fought for the knife. Red Hawk's hand closed on a rock, slammed it into Creed's jaw. Creed roared and bit his wrist. Red Hawk screamed, twisted, and jammed his blade upward, into Creed's ribs. Creed choked. Eyes wide. He tried to speak, but only blood came. He slumped forward. Red Hawk shoved him off, gasping. Below, the canyon was silent. The baby cried once. A high, piercing note that seemed to echo forever. Red Hawk staggered back to Eve. She was pale, lips blue, eyes fluttering. He placed the baby beside her, wrapped them both in a blanket torn from Creed's coat. "You did it," she whispered, barely audible. "So did you," he said, voice thick. She nodded weakly, then closed her eyes. Red Hawk held her. The night settled around them like ash. By dawn, Eve stirred again. Alive. Red Hawk smiled, wept into her hair. When they finally rode away, her in front, the baby swaddled in her arms, Red Hawk carried not just a blade but a purpose. They left blood behind, but they carried life forward. And out there in the silence of the desert, with the wind rising and the sun bleeding gold across the cliffs, a new story began. One the land would remember. Years later, travelers passing through the high canyons of Devil's Backbone would speak of a woman with iron in her gaze and a child who rode like the wind. They lived beyond the mapped world, where lawmen didn't follow and outlaws feared to tread. The woman, once a captive, now walked free with a rifle slung low and a whisper of legend trailing her name. Her daughter, fierce and wild-eyed, bore the sharp cheekbones and quiet strength of her Navajo blood, and the fire of her mother's will. Red Hawk never spoke of the blood he spilled or the names of the dead. He hunted, traded, protected, and when he laughed it came from somewhere deep and rare. Their cabin, nestled against the cliffs, held no riches but one, peace, hard-won and sacred. At dusk he would sit with the girl and show her how to carve a knife from bone or read tracks in the dust. Eve would watch them, hand resting on the scar where life had torn her open and love had stitched her shut again. They had no need for towns or titles. They had each other. And the desert, harsh, unyielding, had finally given something back.